Okay, well, I'm sure they're looking forward to some drinks right after
Oh,
the
do
meeting.
not take it out on Ken. Kato. He's our friend. He's our friend. Take it out on me for the 10-minute break. I was the guarantor of a 10-minute break.
No worries, Tom.
Yeah, we're just slowly getting there. Okay. Good morning, Ken. Billy was going to want to say something by way of introduction here.
Thank you, Tom, and Ken, thank you very much for joining us. We're heading towards the end of our day, but I'm sure this is going to be very interesting and you've got our full attention. I just wanted to highlight to the board, and we did share the deck with you before, and maybe just coming back to something that Tom mentioned earlier in the week as well. Remember, there is a little bit of a, we sort of trying to keep pace with each other. They had their meeting, we gave some feedback between them, between IAASB having their meeting, their work streams have met while we were busy with our board meeting. So there may be a few things that pop up on the slides that we fully realize will still need to go into the coordination bucket. So just keep that in mind with as Ken goes through his presentation.
Right. Okay. Josephine, do you have anything to say? Okay. Ken, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. Before I sort of move into what I have to present here, just wondered if people can see me or people are just seeing the slides.
Yes, you're both on the screen and the slides are on the screen.
Okay, for some reason I cannot see the room, but that's fine. I know you're all there.
We're better not seen on screen.
Yeah, you might be camping out there in the woods, wherever. No matter, thank you all for having me. I'm not alone on the call here. I have some of my team with me, those who are working on our sustainability and experts projects. They're on the line. They'll be listening to the conversation. If there are any questions of detail, any questions that go towards what we've heard on the IAASB exposure drafts, they'll be on standby to chip in and respond as best they can. Before I start, I think it's worth me conveying Gabriela's deep thanks to Josephine, Willy, and Dan for coming to our board meeting last week. Also to share essentially the direction of travel on the matters of coordination between our two boards. That session was very well done, very well coordinated and orchestrated, and I took away a lot out of it. And I think we're making very good progress in terms of the various matters that we're looking at. So that was very well done, and thank you all, Josephine, Willy, and Dan for coming to our board. Okay, so I have a few slides I put together. Willy, Dan, or Josephine might have briefed you on some of the discussion we've had at IAASB last week. So some of what I might share, you might have already heard during the course of your previous 2 days of discussion on sustainability. But no matter what, I'm going to go with a bit of an update on the IAASB discussion last week. And if there's anything that comes up, any questions, I'll be happy to take them as we go along. So maybe if you could move to the first slide, the next slide, please. Thank you. So just a little bit about the global outreach campaign that we've been pursuing at IAASB since the exposure drafts went out, both sustainability and experts. Very deliberately, we made a very big push to get the word out there about those exposure drafts. It wasn't just about meeting public expectations and the expectations of PIB as well, for IAASB to be reaching out to as diverse a group of stakeholders as possible. These were two very significant exposure drafts and together as a package, very substantial in terms of the proposals. So getting the word out there was very important, but importantly also, we needed to get the message out about what those proposals, this package of proposals was all about. It was about really IAASB by developing high quality ethics and independent standards to support transparent, relevant, trustworthy corporate sustainability disclosures. That's number one. And number two, we're working at pace to deliver those standards in a timely manner to stakeholder expectations. We're doing it very deliberately in full conformity with due process. And that is something that we are not taking any shortcuts about. And we're going through our pace, systematically connecting with stakeholders and going through the various stages of the consultation. The standards also equally are being developed in accordance with the public interest framework, as you on your board as well are doing the same with regard to ISA 5000. And that's very critical because we want the standards to be responsive to the public interest when it comes to high quality corporate sustainability disclosures. And finally, those standards are built on our existing set of standards in the code. So they're built already on a robust base of ethics and independent standards. We haven't recreated the wheel from the ground up, so to speak, but we are starting from already a very strong position to develop those standards to be fit for purpose in support of trustworthy sustainability reporting. So as you can see here, we've been really very extensive in terms of the efforts we invested in this outreach efforts. Overall, we very conservatively touched over 7,000 stakeholders through a variety of means. We had our global webinars in February and March. We had webinars with UNCTAD, covering importantly the Africa region that we've not really engaged as often as we would have liked in the past, but this was really an excellent opportunity to do that. Equally, UNCTAD ISA, we had a seminar there, sorry, a webinar with a number of jurisdictions that are part of the ISA working group. And importantly, we had a series of in-person seminars in Toronto, Brussels, Japan, Tokyo, Sydney, and Melbourne. And there I would be remiss not to acknowledge the participation of some the members of the IAASB. Josephine Jackson came to our Brussels roundtable. Sachiko Kai was in Tokyo, and also had Kazuko, I believe, in Tokyo as well. So I think that was very important to have at least some of your, or at least a couple of your board members attending our seminars, and I believe Bill Edge as well was in Australia. But the important takeaway really from this outreach is that we are really connecting with stakeholders we haven't traditionally engaged with as part of our consultation in setting standards, etc. And importantly, when we are doing standards on sustainability, we are reaching out to the community of non-PAs. And in Brussels, we had the International Accreditation Forum, with the chair and the chairs of the convening, the sustainability working group, the co-conveners, the TIC Council, DNV. So very important there. But also we had representation from across the stakeholder community here: investors, preparers, corporate governance community, other standard setters, and as I said, the non-PAs, and of course the accounting profession. Tokyo also was very well done. In fact, we had a huge help from the Japanese Financial Services Agency, who were able to really connect with a very broad range of stakeholders, and importantly, several non-PA organizations operating in the Japanese market. So all in all, I think we got a lot out of it in terms of the exposure to the standards, and as I say, getting the messages out about the importance of the standards and what they intended to achieve. Next slide, please. So, sorry, the one before? Yeah. So just a quick summary in terms of what we received in terms of comments, in terms of the composition of the respondents. The efforts we put in terms of the global outreach campaign, we believe helped enormously in terms of generating interest, and importantly, commitment from many of those stakeholders to respond formally to our exposure drafts. We importantly had responses from organizations that, as indicated earlier, have not traditionally commented on IAASB proposed standards. We had responses from a number of non-PE organizations, IAF, Accountability, the Japan Accreditation Board, for example. For the first time, we had the International CFO Alliance representing the bearer side, regulators from across the board, investor representatives, and interestingly, a response from International Bar Association, very thoughtful and very comprehensive as well, and ACTAD following on from this webinars that we had earlier in the quarter. So overall, 94 respondents taken together between our two exposure drafts on sustainability and experts, really the largest number of responses and level of interest certainly that we've ever had at IAASB in terms of a sort of a set of releases. Next slide, please. So I'll just spend just a couple of minutes here on this slide and summarize at very high level, really what to take away from the efforts we put in on outreach, and also what we are hearing, at least from the first high level review of the responses. I think it's fair to say that there was widespread acknowledgement of ethics as being a critical plank in the sustainability reporting ecosystem. Stakeholders across the board recognize the critical, the essential role of the ethics and independence standards as a pillar alongside the reporting and assurance standards within the global standards ecosystem and the infrastructure. Importantly, there was very robust support and recognition of some of the key premises we went out with the proposals in the exposure drafts. In terms of the design elements, those standards being developed on a profession agnostic basis, being applicable to all sustainability assurance practitioners when it comes to sustainability assurance, regardless of their backgrounds, having those standards be at the same level as those standards that apply to audits of financial statements. Those standards are also being developed on a framework neutral basis. So they would apply regardless of the reporting frameworks or the assurance frameworks. And we spent a lot of time on the final important characteristics of this ethics and independence standards for sustainability assurance. And that is really how to present and package those standards. And the exposure draft essentially presented those standards in a new part 5 of the code under the title International Ethics Standards for Sustainability Assurance, including International Independent Standards, or the ESA for short. So all in all, very, very broad support for those for the package of proposals that our board put out, clear recognition of those standards as being essential as a global baseline. Across the board, there was agreement, I would say, very fair to from our stakeholders to recognize that it would not be in the public interest really to have fragmented standards with jurisdictions doing different standards, because I think one important truth that was apparent, if not clearly articulated, was that ethics should not vary depending on the background of the practitioner or the particular area or location in which they are carrying out their work. So that's in terms of the sort of the positive, but yes, we did hear a lot of comments in terms of areas where our board will need to dedicate additional attention as it considers the detail of the comment letters and the responses we received and the one input we collected through the outreach. And I've summarized here the top sort of 3 to 4 sort of key headlines, if you will, in terms of the areas we're going to be spending quite a bit of time over the coming few weeks and months as we close off our work with a view to getting the standards ready for approval in December. Definitions of certain key terms, and we'll touch on that in a moment, because this connects into one of the matters for coordination with yourselves. The scope of the ASR, we had some comments about whether the scope was a bit too narrow. And in particular, IAASB put forward a suggestion to our board to consider broadening the scope of this, the ASR. We are going to be discussing this further with IAASB. It is not a matter that can be addressed sort of immediately with an answer. It does require some additional thought and analysis. And the independence considerations, where we're going to be spending most of our time on coordination, I would say, Tom, in your board. How we're approaching group sustainability assurance engagements from the perspective of ethics and independence, and also relative to how you're developing your standard in terms of the assurance process. The independence considerations regarding value chain entities is going to be important. And also we had comments more related to the independent side in terms of how we are setting out the standards, packaging them and presenting them, and the comprehensiveness of those standards in the areas, particularly in the areas of non-assurance services. And we have also collected a number of comments on our fee proposals. We also received quite a number of comments on our proposals relating to communication of no clause between the sustainability assurance practitioner and the auditor. We also had a comment in particular from IAASB asking our board to consider strengthening that communication provision, which I'm happy to touch on maybe towards the end, because that wasn't a matter that also IAASB further emphasized in our interaction with them. In fact, just yesterday, when we give them an update on the progress of our sustainability work. So I would say overall, at a broad level, the key matters we are hearing or we are reading through the comment letters are in line with the feedback that we heard on outreach. And essentially, they fit into those broad categories that I've sort of outlined. But I think it's fair also to say that there were many calls from our stakeholders across the board, and we heard it loud and clear on our outreach as well during the first and second quarters about the importance of further coordination with yourselves on a number of those issues of coordination, which I'll turn to in a moment. But overall, I would say, Tom, that kind of summarizes what we got out of all the efforts we put in the first and second quarters. It was a very significant investment of time and resources, I would say, and efforts, particularly with Gabriela and other board members and staff in really getting the word out with regard to those proposals. So before I turn to the matters of coordination that I'd like to update you all on following our board meeting last week, I'll suggest to take a pause here, Tom or Vili, and see if there's anybody on your board who would like to raise any matter that I've touched on. Any questions, comments?
Thank you, Ken. Anyone, like, before we hit to specific coordination issues, want to ask Ken a question about the response to the comment period, all the work that they've done? I know they've been around the world in less than 80 days for this. Again, people, we were so focused on trying to get convergence between the two boards earlier this week that we're anxious to hear your thoughts on that, Ken.
Okay. Okay, but I thought you had a question, Tom. You wanted to come in now or maybe later?
No, not a question at all.
Okay. Okay. So let's move on to the next slide then, and we'll touch on the coordination matters here. So this is really just a summary of the items I'm going to touch on in the next few moments. Definition of sustainability information, how we're approaching the development of the standards on our two boards relative to group sustainability assurance engagements, the determination of components. And I know that there's been some changes on your board, or at least at your task force level, and we've had discussions this week already. And Vili very helpfully gave me an update following your discussion already on Tuesday. So I have a bit of an indication as to how you're traveling on the issue of components. using the work of another practitioner, which I'd like to touch on for a little bit, and just to maybe see whether we can get a bit of an exchange there to see how we're going to be moving forward on the matter of another practitioner. And then I'll close off with a few matters, additional matters of coordination. So let's move to the next slide, please. Right, so definition of sustainability, information sustainability matters. Going into our board meeting last June, our task force had the benefit of some discussions in the context of already a first pass at looking at the comments on the exposure draft, and presented what you see on the left-hand side of the slide. Essentially some restructuring of the proposal that was in the exposure draft with the addition of the sentence in red that you can see here that was intended to build in a closer linkage to ISA 5000. Following Vili's and Josephine's and Dan's intervention and update to our board last week, what I can share with you all, and Vili might have updated you as well in terms of the key takeaways. Essentially clear support from our board to seek to the greatest extent possible, again, all subject to seeing the words, etc., basically aiming for a common core to the definition of sustainability information, with potentially a related definition, a related term and definition, which would be aligned to how you're approaching your definition on your side, i.e. sustainability matters. So that is what our task force has been considering with the benefit of the direction of IAASB last week. Our work stream 2 met on the Friday and applied its mind to how it might be able to pivot that definition that you see on the left-hand side of the screen on the slide into essentially this concept of the common core of a definition of sustainability information that would be simple, high level, and essentially would speak to the essence of the matter without getting into the technicalities of what would work or what would be applicable and necessary from the perspective of the two boards. So I think it's looking very optimistic that we are going to be able to blend in a good place on the definition of sustainability information, I would say. But we still have a bit of work to do, because we need to see where you will be coming out of your board meeting this week in terms of any further refinements to your definition. Presuming that you will not change the core definition of sustainability information, we'd be very interested to see what you would be proposing, or at least at the level of your task force in terms of sustainability matters, and what we might be able to do on our side from the perspective of ethics and independence, bearing in mind that the scope of our standards on IAASB is broader than the scope of the IAASB standard, ISA 5000, because we cover both the reporting and the assurance sides. So that's very important. The other consideration that's also very important from the perspective of our work stream is to make sure that the definition that we put in the code is going to be future-proof. Perhaps easier said than done, but this is a very important consideration from our work stream's perspective, and I'm sure will be also from our board's perspective. Because sustainability reporting, as we know, is a rapidly evolving domain, and there are going to be a lot of changes. Reporting frameworks are going to continue to change very, very rapidly. New subject matters may come in, etc. So we want those definitions, if they're going to be a coordinated sort of set of definitions, be two definitions. We want those to be able to stand the test of time. So that's where we are. I think one final point I'll just mention, and we communicated that to Vili as well for your task force's consideration. There was a suggestion at our board for IAASB to consider whether there would be merit in developing a term that would be closer to IASB 3000, more linked to essentially the concepts of sustainability, subject matter information and underlying subject matter, but clearly linked to sustainability or sustainability assurance. We left that with you. We did not come up with an answer, so to speak, but this was a suggestion that I'm putting on the table for the sake of transparency in terms of what sort of bubbled up from our board discussion last week. So I'll pause here. Really, that's all I'm able to share at this point, Tom. I know our work stream has been working in the background. They've been trying to, as I said, pivot a bit of the definition. They have a working draft which they need to further consider in the context of where the IAASB task force is at, and maybe where you yourselves as a board are going directionally. And then there's going to be those coordination meetings over the coming few weeks to see whether we can get to a very close alignment on the definition. But I'll pause here if there are any questions.
Thanks, Ken. And I could assure you this week, we definitely took this topic up, and I think we've incorporated many of your thoughts, the IAASB thoughts, in our latest draft of the definition that I think Billy has already shared with you. But I'm going to turn it over to Billy.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, Ken, I'm maybe just on one aspect, the last point on the slide about the suggestion to align closer to ISO 3000 revised. That was already considered in leading up to the ED. I think we got the feedback that to use very technical terms like subject matter information and subject matter is not preferred, that we try and be more sustainability specific. So I think the board, our board certainly supported what you have on the slide on the right-hand side on the top, that there's a lot of sense in pursuing two core definitions of sustainability information and sustainability matters. To your point, I think we do recognize that both on our side and the ethics side, there will probably be a need for essential material that's relevant to each standard. So part of that essential material would be to say that for purposes of the ISAs, subject matters is the equivalent to, sustainability matters is the equivalent to subject matters in our assurance standards more generally, and equally in the case of sustainability information, it's the subject matter information is the equivalent for that. So I think we can continue to work on those core definitions. I think we are fairly close. I really think between my team and your team, we can come up with a sentence that describes I think one of your board members referred to it as the raw material. So what's the raw material of sustainability information, and what's the raw material of sustainability matters? And then obviously add any essential material or application material that either of us may need.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Billy. I think it's very clear. Yeah.
Can we get Edo in first too, Ken? And then I'll turn to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Ken and Billy, to provide your perspective. And I clearly agree with seeking alignment. So I think we would have a difficult time to explain to anybody why the IAASB and IASPA need to have different definitions. Appreciate that your scope is a bit broader, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the definition needs to be different. And so that goes to what we are trying to define. And then and I think if I stand back from this, so whilst we all agree on common core and specificities that maybe need to be catered to, what I'm worried about is process. And we speak about coordination, but at the same time, the boards move forward in their own direction and then trying to fix and patch it up. And that runs the risk of either board digging their heels in deeper. And I would, going forward, much more be in favor of a process that proposals brought to either board are coordinated and aligned before they're brought to the board, just to prevent these sort of issues to resolve different positions. And I appreciate, and Tom explained to us that some of this will be trashed out in a meeting between IAASB and the IAASB, and that the door won't be opened until we've come to a common ground. And I support that, but I prefer that wouldn't be necessary going forward. And so I guess suggestions from either board to go into a certain direction is not necessarily helpful. We better have a common ground before it goes to the respective boards. Thank you.
Yeah, on that point, I've talked about the point, and we've agreed this process with Ken and his board to have a coordination session followed up by task force meetings happen simultaneously in the same city. So presumably, if there needs to be some further coordination, those task forces could get together at some point. But some of the messiness, as I've explained in public already, has to do with the fact that we were leapfrogging each other from a time frame, and that was going to be the case. So hopefully at some point we will be comfortable with our shared definitions, and we'll lock these down, and they'll remain locked down. And then both of our boards will have to show some discipline, not willing to tinker. And that's, Ken, you would not have heard some of my discussion earlier this week, that there is value in just agreement too, right? Obviously, we need to address our own specific remits, but at some point, we just have to agree to agree,
yeah,
and put the pens down. And hopefully that will happen sooner than later. But there's nothing that I've heard from Gabriella or Ken or their board that they're against that idea. But Ken, I'll let you respond to that point and other points that were raised in response.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Tom and Edo, and the message. In fact, the message has come out very clearly to us for our stakeholders, and even just yesterday, Gabriel and I were meeting with High School Committee 1. Again, the message here was very clear: our two boards have to be coordinated, especially on the files we have in front of us on sustainability, because the time frame is very tight. The process is essentially is also very tight and exposed to risks if we're not working very closely and engaging very openly on issues that are not yet resolved. So I think, in fact, there were questions around how our boards really are working through their processes. Not so much up until now, but going into the final stretch of basically preparing our two sets of standards for finalization in September/December. So we have to really be proactive, and as you say, Tom, very diligent in how we do that, accepting that yes, we may not be able to achieve perfection in the best of times, but we really have to get the positions that we are able to put out that will clearly be fully coordinated, and that's really what our stakeholders are expecting. Okay, so unless there are any other comments, Tom, I'll maybe move to the next topic here.
Yes, Ken, sorry.
Okay, so group sustainability assurance engagements. First of all, just a quick recap of what we heard, a very, very high level from our respondents to the exposure draft. Largely across the board, our stakeholders were supportive of the ESR/Part 5 addressing group sustainability assurance engagements. If I can put it very simply, essentially most of those engagements that will be in the first wave of mandatory assurance will be for the largest entities, and invariably these are going to be for groups across the board, across jurisdictions. So there was clear support there for the ESA to address independence for group sustainability assurance engagements. That said, there were some concerns about the differences in terms of approaches between ISA 5000 and the proposed ESA. On the ESA, the approach we've taken is really to develop the independent standards to be at the level that would be equivalent to the independent standards applied to group audits in the code. And clearly on the ISA 5000 side, you have taken more kind of an overarching approach, recognizing the overarching nature of ISA 5000. So the approaches were different, but notwithstanding that, even then, stakeholders are calling for coordination as to how we're approaching group assurance engagements. There were also some questions and concerns around the potential implementation challenges for non-PAs. And there, we will consider this at IAASB in terms of what can be done in terms of any further simplification of the provisions, if at all possible, yet keeping the premise of standards equivalent to those applicable to audits. But one possible avenue to address those concerns about understandability and consistency of application really would be through the development of non-authoritative guidance. And there we heard the encouragement from IAASB, in fact, for our two boards to be coordinating even in regards to the development of non-authoritative material to facilitate consistent application of our standards. What came out of our June board discussion, support from our board to retain the provisions we have on group sustainability assurance engagements in the ESA in the context of the very clear support we have received from stakeholders in the exposure draft. In light of what Vili, Josephine, and Dan shared with our board last week, there was optimism, I would say, a clear sense of optimism that the changes you are contemplating and you are moving on, directionally at least on your side, will enhance the interoperability of our proposed ESA with ISA 5000 insofar as group assurance engagements are concerned. So that's very positive. And clearly you've made some changes that better interlink the provisions we have on group assurance engagements in section 5405 in our ESA, in terms of some additional requirements you've put in, as well as some terms and key concepts and the related definitions. Group sustainability information, group sustainability assurance engagements, and the related firms that will be involved, and the concept of component, which I'll come on to onto the next stage. So I would say it's been very positive at our board in terms of getting a sense as to how we are coordinating on the topic of group sustainability assurance engagements. That said, there was still a word of caution, I would say, Tom and your board members, because our board members felt that they would still need to see the detailed drafting. And yes, I think it's going to be hard to avoid not looking at how it is all coming together. So this is all subject, therefore, to our board having the benefit of seeing your draft moving into the third quarter and seeing how the linkages are being made to our ESA, as well as we're making any further refinements in the context of the exposure of responses. So I'll pause here insofar as group assurance engagements are concerned, Tom, in case there are any comments or questions.
Any observations from here about things that we've done this week or want to share with Ken on groups as it relates to this topic?
I can maybe just confirm, Tom, to our board that I have already shared with Ken that we're basically maintaining the position that we have in terms of how we view the reporting boundary. And then within that reporting boundary, you get components. And then we have, for ease of reference, made it now clear that, or we're sticking to our proposal that group components are components within the control group and value chain components are components outside of the controlled group.
Okay, Willie, well, maybe that's a good segue then into the next topic.
Bill,
Oh, yep, go ahead. Yep.
Ken.
I just wanted to give some feedback to Ken. It must be hard, Ken, not being able to see the room and that, but when you put up the issues which were relevant to you, which were the most to talk about, they're the ones we've talked about as well. We are right on the same page with the types of issues, but as you go through each one, you know, and other than opening up the entire conversation again, I think it's interesting to hear them, but we probably won't be coming back with detailed questions unless we get into the detail itself, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So silence means nodding of heads, if you could see us.
I can see the room actually now. Now I can see the room, although it's you're all
Small.
dwarves, dwarves on screen, but I can see the room. Thank you. Okay, so why don't we flip to the next slide? And maybe I'll move into components here. Okay, so now thank you, Willie, for just updating me and really reconfirming the direction of travel in terms of how you're approaching the concepts of group components and value chain components. First of all, where we are now in components, yes, our two boards now have the concepts of the concept of component embedded into proposed standards and defined. At the moment, our proposal on IAASB is to exclude value chain entities from components. But that was the exposure draft position. In light of in light of our June board meeting last week and what we heard in terms of your discussions and the proposals you deliberated from your task force, what I can share is IAASB is directionally supportive of aligning the definition of component with what you have in ISA 5000. Equally, our board is also supportive directionally of taking up the sub-elements, if you're aware, of group components and value chain components. Workstream 1 had the chance to consider those two components and see how they would be incorporated in our ESA post-exposure. We still have to work for the drafting in taking up those two components or two sub-elements, if I can say that, into our provisions. But at least at first blush, we did not see any sort of significant impediments to our being in a position to do that. So I'm very optimistic. Our workstream 1 still will need to go for the drafting to weave those two components in, the group components and value chain components into a drafting, but I'm very optimistic that we'll be able to do that. We may have to obviously take up changes to our definition of component, but with the benefit of the support of our board, we will be seeking full alignment with where you're traveling on those concepts. There were some questions on a matter that I think was raised in the discussion when we had Willie, Josephine, and Dan. And there was a thought, I think, that was raised that the value chain component could be within a reporting entity's operational control. And I think that tripped up a few of the board members on IAASB as to whether that, under what circumstances that would arise, especially in light of the fact that we had seen already in your draft ISA 5000 post-exposure, that a value chain component would in fact not be within a reporting entity's operation control. So all to say is there was some discussion there and maybe some clarification that was being sought. And I don't know where you've landed on this one, and whether this is indeed an issue or not that we need to coordinate on. But it is a bit of an open question from our side that we need to further explore with you.
Josephine?
Thank you, Ken. So, yeah, I think when we were having the discussion last Tuesday, there was the conversation was around the fact that there's value chain information that is certainly within a reporting entity's operational control. But essentially, that would get captured as a group component work. But you're correct in that if you're if you're doing value chain component work and that's your lens, then that is certainly outside the operational control of the group. We do have application material in the standard now that tries to explain this rather interesting nuance in actually just trying to make it easier for people to consider what are my components, etc. But we might have another look at it just to make sure it is absolutely crystal clear. So, and also so as not to give the impression that value chain information does not exist within the reporting entity's operational control, because of course that is that's where the core of it will be. So thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Josephine. That's a helpful clarification, and certainly does help me at least better understand how we might be able to manage that. Because in fact, on our ESR, we had also considered that possibility, that situation. Where the reporting entity has operational control of information relating to a value chain entity, and therefore assurance work might be done on that information and not necessarily at the value chain component. So that is certainly a circumstance where we had considered and have considered at IAASB from the independence perspective. Why don't we just flip to the next slide, and I think maybe just some additional points to share here. So insofar as independence is concerned, when we look at components from the ESR perspective, we recognize that different independence considerations will apply to group components and value chain components, because that's essentially the current position in the ESR. There's a recognition of what is within the organizational boundary and what is outside of it, but within the reporting boundary. But equally, the ESR recognizes the practicalities or the practical challenges of obtaining information from value chain entities, and therefore it does take a proportionate approach in terms of how it deals with the independence requirements. So that's basically the approach we had put out in the exposure draft. And related to that, there is consideration of the engagement team, the group engagement team, using the assurance work of another practitioner. At the moment, our task force, our work stream is not proposing any changes to the independence considerations regarding the use of another practitioner, pending consideration by our board of the exposure draft responses. But importantly, how on your board, Tom, you are addressing the use of the work of another practitioner. And maybe there are two related issues to using the work of another practitioner. One is how you're approaching conceptually the concept of another practitioner as a participant in the assurance engagement. And the other issue is essentially the concept of using work versus using assurance work of another practitioner. And that's the other issue I'll touch on in a moment. But if we were to just take the issue of another practitioner and how you're approaching it on your side, from what I understand from the release of data I received late Tuesday, the approach you're taking, or what is the direction you're going, is to say that you will consider strengthening the expectations of the reporting firm or the group engagement team being sufficiently and appropriately involved in the work of another practitioner if that practitioner is carrying out work within the entity's operational control or information within the entity's operational control. And that might trigger some questions, I suppose, from the IAASB perspective, because we will need to consider whether that would mean that you could have individuals within another practitioner who might potentially be considered members of the engagement team. If you're going to bring in the concept of sufficient and appropriate involvement in the work of another practitioner. That connects to a clarification, a comment that in fact that IOSCO Committee 1 had submitted to, I believe, our two boards, but certainly to IAASB, to consider the definition of another practitioner. because at the moment in the exposure draft, we have defined another practitioner to be a practitioner who carries out work for purposes of the sustainability engagement, but that practitioner is not within the direction, supervision, and review of the reporting firm. IAASB has really encouraged us to have another think about how we are thinking about this concept. And therefore, really, at least I have some reactions and some questions as to how this might impact the approach IAASB might take when it comes to independence provisions. If indeed there might be a potential for individuals within another practitioner to be scoped in within the concept of an engagement team, and at the moment they are not. So I will just pause here, Tom, Vili, I don't know if you have any reactions, but I just wanted to flag that this is an area that we will want to discuss further with you at the task force and staff level, and see how we can be aligned in terms of our approaches. Also having regard to the comment our two boards have received from IAASB Committee 1 on this particular matter.
Thank you, Ken. Maybe just one point of clarification, and Josephine will correct me if I'm wrong. But I think, you know, when we look at components and practitioners, I think it is important, firstly, that we don't conflate components with practitioners. So when we look at components, we say, well, components is driven by the, I'm just going to say group practitioner. It's driven by the group practitioner in deciding how they're going to construct the engagement, what their engagement strategy and plan is going to be. And from that perspective, we've said group components are within the controlled group and value chain components are outside the controlled group. But when you then start thinking about how are you going to get your evidence in relation to those components, then you're going to start thinking about, am I going to do that work myself? Can I use someone else to do that work on my behalf? Can I use the work of someone else? And that's when that comes into play. So, and what drives that is whether the group practitioner can be sufficiently and appropriately involved in the work. So if the group practitioner can be sufficiently appropriate involved in the work, that practitioner is always a component practitioner. Whether they're doing work on the group on a group component, which will be in the most instances, and maybe sometimes they could also do work on a value chain component, especially if it's only one or two steps up or down the value chain. As soon as you go deeper into the value chain, it's less likely that that will happen. So even in that instance where that practitioner performs work on a value chain component, they will still be known as a component practitioner because you are sufficiently and appropriately involved. So the flip side of the coin is another practitioner is a practitioner where you aren't sufficiently and appropriately involved. And again, that will be most likely in relation to value chain components. But as we were coming into this meeting, there was also the possibility that a value chain, another practitioner, I call them value chain practitioners, another practitioner could also do work on a group component. And you will remember that was the IAASB issue that was raised. So another, in our construct at the moment, another practitioner is never part of the engagement team.
And also because, and that's spot on really, and also because they're not performing procedures for the purpose of this sustainability assurance engagement. They're performing procedures on a separate engagement for a separate purpose, maybe for regulatory reasons, like checking metrics that are being reported and so forth. And so essentially then you as the group practitioner, you're just thinking, gosh, that's somewhere where I can actually get some evidence to help me draw sufficient appropriate evidence. So those are critical pieces. One is they're not performing procedures for the specific engagement and you're not sufficiently and appropriately involved. Thank you, Billy. Thanks, Ken.
Okay. Well, that certainly clarifies at least a couple of questions I had in my mind, Vili, and the way you've explained it, and Josephine as well, your further clarification. Essentially, if I understood you, another practitioner would be essentially either a firm or individuals within that firm who are carrying out work that could be used for purposes of the sustainability assurance engagement, but that work wasn't done for purposes necessarily of that engagement.
Yeah,
And
that's
therefore-
spot on. Yeah.
And therefore they're not part of the engagement team, because I thought, Vidya, as you provided me with your update, I thought that directionally your board was going towards strengthening the requirements relative to the sufficiency and appropriateness of involvement of the group team in the work of another practitioner. And that triggered questions, of course, as to whether indeed you were bringing them into the engagement team in doing so, because there would be implications for independence if you were to do that.
And Ken, the other thing as well is that when we talked about this, the IAASB talked about this week, or last Tuesday, we did think that perhaps we need to add some additional application material that brings this concept to life, that you're not performing procedures on the engagement, because it's just not clear.
Yeah.
It's clear in our heads, it all works for when you put all the definitions together, but actually there's a story there that we're just not telling in a simple manner. So we'll have something in the application material that clarifies that.
Okay, so it'll come down then to a matter of really looking at your drafting and the changes you'll be proposing, Josephine, and your task force to how you're dealing with using the work of another practitioner. But let me just pause here. Are there any comments, questions?
Anyone want to come in here? I think Ken,
No?
no further comment on it.
Okay, so let's move to the next slide. Well, the next two slides really are just really just an update to you in terms of what our work stream 1 proposed to our board last week. And the previous slide just alluded to that at the end, which is that our work stream 1 is proposing some rationalization to the structure of the provisions to deal with, the independence provisions dealing with using assurance work within the group context, also using the work of another practitioner, and also when it comes to assurance work that's performed at or with respect to a value chain entity. And essentially, our work stream 1 is proposing that sort of rationalization as a response to some concerns we've heard on our exposure draft about what respondents perceived to be a level of complexity that was perhaps not necessary. So we're trying to simplify as best we can without necessarily making changes to the underlying principles. So the principles will at least until we see the full analysis of the respondents' comments, the principles will not change from what we had in the exposure draft. Essentially, this slide speaks to how we approached the consideration of independence in a group context, using the work of another practitioner, and in relation to value chain entities. Next slide, please. And this is just a sort of a graphical representation of how directionally we're moving towards that restructuring, building in within our section 5405 that deals with group sustainability assurance engagements, to bring in the references to value chain components, and within the section that deals with using the work of another practitioner, also putting in any appropriate references to value chain components, insofar as another practitioner would be involved in carrying work at value chain components. So all subject to further development of those provisions and those restructured sections, but otherwise the provisions, the underlying principles should not change. Okay, so let's move to the next slide, because this was just a quick update. And the final main topic really I wanted to just bring to your attention, and this is a matter that we had already signaled to Willy and the IAASB task force that we would need to further coordinate with you. And that is the approach you're taking in terms of the changes to the references to assurance work of another practitioner, and simply referring to work of another practitioner. There might be implications to making that sort of change from an independence perspective, because in our ESR, the independence provisions really apply only when the work is assurance work that is performed by another practitioner. So it really is going to be a matter of further coordination and really understanding how on your side you are looking at the concept of work, and whether that's exclusively assurance work or potentially a mix of assurance and non-assurance work that then the reporting firm would consider for purposes of gathering sufficient appropriate evidence to support the assurance report. So I will just pause here because at the moment, as I said, the position in our exposure draft is to refer to assurance work, and therefore changing it to work might create some implications. And maybe the next slide will speak to essentially the question that I've raised. But maybe I'll pause here, Tom, just to take any questions or comments.
Any reaction? Billy, are you about to come in?
Well, just a question for clarification, Ken. If I look at this, well, these two slides with the question, and I certainly agree with you, we would need to clarify this. But are we now talking about? So this is just a question for clarification in terms of how the code is structured. So are you differentiating now basically between assurance work that is not assurance work, and then you also have non-assurance services?
Well,
I guess what I'm asking is work other than assurance, can work other than assurance work also be non-assurance services?
Well, if that work is going to be used for purposes of the sustainability assurance engagement, it may be non-assurance services. But if it's not assurance work, that basically would not be within the scope of our independence standards, the IAAS. The IAAS only apply to assurance work that's performed by another practitioner, whether for purposes of the sustainability assurance engagement or not, as Josephine mentioned earlier. But as long as it's assurance work, it will be scoped in for purposes of independence under our ESR.
Right. So I think we've already flagged that this is something the task force will give further attention to, because I think it's just on initial read, I think it's going to be very important on both sides to define that line between assurance work and what is not assurance work. And we haven't really applied our minds to that, but I can just see that may be a difficult one. But let's see where we get to. As you said, it's clearly a matter for further coordination.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll take that conversation to next step, really, after our board meetings, and of course have discussions with our respective task forces and come together to seek full alignment of minds in terms of how we're approaching the references to work versus assurance work. Okay, so let's move to the next slide, please, and maybe I'll close off with a few other matters that I'd like to bring to your attention. I know that you've had discussions regarding the concept of at least as demanding as the IAASB code, and Willy has updated me on essentially your direction now on this concept. And from what I understood, you will be doing away with the third pathway that you had in your proposals, at least your task force's proposals, going into your meeting this week. That will help us enormously. We had given some feedback to your task force last week at IAASB. And that change, if it is, this is where you're going, certainly will help us a lot on IAASB. So that's at least very positive. The next item here, which touched on earlier, which is really the comment ISCO has raised on the matter of engagement team versus another practitioner. So we have some clarification there, but we of course will need to work on the details and the drafting, etc. And then maybe I'll mention also we have connected with your task force from our experts projects perspective. We have teed up at least 2 or 3 coordination meetings over the coming weeks to work through a number of coordination matters from the perspective of exposure draft on using the work of an external expert. There are some matters there that we've identified already, and we will be having a first touch point next week. The definition of expertise we can share then with your task force and certainly the staff what we heard on the responses to our experts exposure draft. We'll be speaking a bit about how to build tighter linkages between essentially your standards on both the auditing side and the sustainability assurance side, and our proposed provisions dealing with external experts in the code. And finally, also looking for potential further alignment in guidance regarding how we address evaluation of competency and capability regarding using the work of an external expert. So a number of matters there that at least at a broad headline level, we will need to talk through. But I'm very hopeful we'll be able to reach a good coordinated position on those various matters in the coming weeks. So I'll pause here, Tom, just to see if there are any further comments or questions on your side.
Any comments from our board to Ken? Any other perspective? Oh, sorry, Sachika.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Ken. I think this is very, very helpful, and I can now, feeling that we are toward the real convergence, right? It's very helpful. One thing I just want to share is that about the one thing that I also need to have some coordination is about the another aspect of the definition of another practitioner. I mean, I think IAASB code, it referred to DSR, but in the 5,000 definition, we refer to sufficient and appropriate involvement. And I think this is also something that we need to coordinate. So far, I have no, strong point about which one is better, but I think it should be same concept.
Yes.
And it should be the same language. So I just want to, make sure that it is also one of the things that we need to coordinate.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Sachiko. My quick reaction is that's absolutely spot on. In fact, we at IAASB, we ought to be following your lead on how you would be defining the concept of another practitioner, because it is an assurance concept. It is not really for the code to be setting up the concept of another practitioner, because it is essentially a concept that is essential to the performance of the assurance work. So we will be fully aligned, and you're absolutely right. And I had in mind to also raise this issue of terminology, recognizing that you're moving away from the concept of direction, supervision, and review, and really more specifically referring to the sufficiency and appropriateness of involvement in the work of another practitioner. So absolutely, the terminology need to be aligned. So we will certainly do that.
So.
Thanks, Tom. And Ken, it's really just an overarching comment, I think, because I think it's been very interesting going through the numbers of moving parts that there are here, and obviously you've talked about the ongoing coordination, and that's really important. I think it's it's obviously in the public interest that the terminology is aligned, that we are as far as possible, using the same words, and that those words are reflecting the intent, and the intent is consistent as well. So I suppose I just have a slight nervousness about the speed at which all this is moving, as to whether there's enough time to undertake all that coordination, to make sure that that everything is being fully reflected in the respective sets of standards. So I guess it's really just an encouragement to make sure that coordination goes on, that it's that it's very, very, I suppose, very, very fluid, and that we get to that combined goal. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'll say this again, we're fully committed to coordination. Both, we have a process that I'm confident in that we're going to get to a good solution, but we are going to approve the standard in September. So I'm confident that it will have coordinated efforts bedded down by September, but clearly there's an expectation in the marketplace, particularly in jurisdictions adopting our standard, that our standard will be ready by September. Mark?
Yeah, just actually to pick up on what Sue's just said. I mean, frankly, after that presentation, my head is spinning a little bit. I must be honest. But I am concerned that you're on sort of two trains on parallel tracks, and you're going in the same direction. But I really worry about the actual mechanics and practicalities of ensuring that you are coordinated, and that you're coordinated in time, because clearly once the IAASB goes NAP with its standard, there can't be any changes to IAASB's standard beyond that point. And I just struggle to understand how that is going to be achieved. Because obviously, you operate as two independent boards. I understand that, and I'm just concerned that with the best will in the world, you might not get there in time on these definitions.
Well, Mark, like this issue would exist whether we were approving both in September separate times or others. Like, we are two independent boards. So the only way it's going to happen is if we discipline ourselves and reach an agreement. Like, the prize is adoption of our standards too. And if we don't meet the expectations of the marketplace in terms of timeliness of our delivery, we may miss that. And so both boards are fully committed to it. We have a process in place that I have confidence in. We're going to take as much time and effort to achieve convergence. And then at some point, we have to show discipline too, as our board, to stop tinkering. And an agreement's an agreement. Like, it could happen if we were approving our standards at the same date, that both boards could change their approach. So we're going to dedicate appropriate energy to this effort. And I am confident that we will get to a converged solution. That being said, as Ken mentioned, both boards have their process. So we'll have to play this out and let the results speak for themselves. But there is an expectation that we're going to deliver for some jurisdictions in September. Julie?
It's sort of along the same lines, and I just repeat something I said at the beginning of the meeting, which is just allowing enough time to have whatever comes out of the coordination land for some reflection on it, to be able to know that there are no practical issues with it. And I know this probably just goes without saying, but just allowing for that reflection, because some of the items that Ken, you went through and that we've talked about can appear very complicated. Maybe there's a simple solution to them, but they're a bit murky at the moment for me as to what the end goal will look like. And so it's just making sure there's that sufficient amount of reflection time to know that there aren't going to be practical issues going forward.
Josephine?
Yes, and as we've said many times now this afternoon, we are very, very closely coordinated, but we just flip it slightly upside down and look at it more positively. We already had an agreement on one matter this week, which was the quality management 3-tier. And that's it, that's done. IAASB were aware of it, they were concerned about it. We brought the proposal to the board, PIOB were concerned about it, IOSCO raised concern, and we dealt with it. So it's done. So matter number one, coordination, done. The definitions, we've all agreed in the direction that we're going with. IAASB are proposing that they align on the sustainability matters, sustainability information, and we will do the same. And then if we need something specific to our standards, because we have different objectives as boards, that will be a different piece and one part. So we're pretty much done there as well. So and if you start working your way through the list, it's actually already ticking off very well. And we did that this week as a board, and they did that with us last week as a board. So let's also try and be very positive about what we have achieved so far as a group in our coordination too, and maintain that positivity as we work our way to our deadlines and our July meetings. Thank you.
Okay. Mark?
Yeah, I don't want to labour this point too much, but I mean, we're now at the end of June. You will meet, the IAASB will meet in September to approve this standard. We've got the holiday season coming up now in July and August. And yes, we have made progress. I agree, Josephine, we certainly have. But there still seems to be an awful lot to get through in, at best 2 months.
So, but we were trying to make the point that there's substantive issues that we've made significant progress for, of which we have a large bit of the process scheduled for July that would still provide adequate time for people to review it. And we have a July board call as well, which is another opportunity to review these issues. So, certainly if we postpone this, the idea that it's too hard and will take too long, we will not do it. And so I'd rather be optimistic that we're going to fulfill our commitment here and continue on the timetable. Right? The alternative is another public interest issue about timeliness. And the idea that maybe it would hinder some global adoption. Like some jurisdictions have told us that they would like the text of the standard bedded down by our September board meeting. And so I'd rather be positive. Clearly, we won't put anything out that is not subject to our quality test. But in my mind, we have been balancing this from the very start, and we've made real progress on it. So the alternatives aren't great. And so we have a lot to do in July. We've gone so far so quickly as well that that the idea that we can't deal with pretty discrete issues whilst waiting, they're not at the heart of the standard itself. So I think with goodwill and with a process in place that we have a pretty good chance of bedding this stuff down. If not, then we'll have to consider where we are in September. Anyone else? Okay. Ken, anything else from your side?
Yeah, well, thank you, Tom. Yes, certainly on our side, we will make every effort to be working as closely as possible with your task force, Tom, and of course our colleagues on IAASB at the staff level in the coming months of the month of July, certainly. In September, we ought to be speaking maybe offline, maybe it's a conversation between Vili and me in terms of the process, because our two boards will be meeting in the same week. And we ought to really work out how the week is going to unfold yes, we're going to be almost walking in lockstep as we go through the final issues, at least insofar as your document is concerned. If as your target is an approval in September. So we're going to have to be working very closely and really mapping out the points of connectivity throughout the week, potentially ending up with, if at all necessary, and maybe that's again something we can take offline, a joint session between our two boards if there are any final remaining open issues. But again, no commitments on our side until we've seen the drafting of the latest changes on your document. And given the opportunity for our task force, our work streams to look at your changes, your updates to your document, and then giving our board on IAASB the benefit of and the opportunity to review those changes as well. So there's, as you say, Tom, there's some work to be done there. We have a process to work through it. And let's do our best and see where we can get there in September.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you for the time that you and your staff have put into the efforts to date. We're fully committed to this, and certainly we're going to stay ambitious towards our targets with a commitment to bringing these standards together. I think Gato made the point well that no one will understand if we diverge on these things. So I think this brings us to the close of this public session. Billy, anything else from a public standpoint that we need to raise? So as we close the public session, we'll have one more small executive session after this. I'd like to say a few things. First of all, some administrative matters. So the draft minutes of this meeting will be distributed to the board for comment in due course and will be posted for approval at the September 2024 session. The IAASB meetings for this third quarter of the following, we will almost certainly have the scheduled call on July 24. I would plan on it. It will be the first session, so which is East Coast time early in the morning in the US. Then we'll have a 5-day meeting scheduled for September 16th to the 20th in New York. I would plan on it being there for most of 5 days. One element, though, as Ken points out, we'll have to think about how we deal with interactions with the board during that week. If there are remaining issues, us being in the same place at the same time could be very helpful for ironing out and bedding down any possible convergence issues in place. Papers for the September meeting will be posted beginning August 26th, and the materials for the discussion posted for all materials will be up online by August 30th. I think we're at a really crucial moment. We have a lot of key work to do on a lot of topics. We made really good progress this week. Convergence and coordination is tough. It's even tougher when you're in these public sessions and people see the effective making of the sausage. It's a little messy, but at the end, I'm confident that we'll get to really good product that is converged. Both boards want to get there, and we will. I think we are coming down the home stretch here, and it will be bumps in the road as we get there. I think we have on the next agenda, Billy and I were talking about it, we have sustainability, going concern, fraud coming back to us, more technology, and probably a little bit of pie with some clarity around the options too. So it will be a lengthy meeting, particularly since we're hopeful on approval in September. Mark, thank you for attending your first meeting. Is there any observations you want to give in terms of the broad meeting that we just had?
Well, I think I'd say, yeah, it was very interesting first meeting. I did, as you know, come to this meeting at very short notice, i.e. I was told on Friday lunchtime, get yourself on a plane to Madrid next week. I obviously didn't have as much time to prepare for this meeting as I would have hoped. And I guess that might have shown at times, but hopefully, I mean, I certainly enjoyed the discussion, and I'm very happy with you know, the due process which clearly goes on this board, and I hope that whilst perhaps at times I might have been a little controversial, it's been at least thought-provoking from your perspective. It certainly has been from mine. So thank you very much for your tolerance, and you may see me again in September.
Unless your plane gets locked up or something, we expect to see you in September. The job of effective oversight is to challenge those being overseen, so none of it is taken in the wrong way. One of the things, though, that we want to be clear is why we're doing what we're doing at the timetable and with a sense of optimism about it. And so that's the real spirit. There is a lot of expectations in the marketplaces, particularly as it relates to our delivery of sustainability assurance. And so rest assured, we're not going to release a product before it's time. That's the ultimate thing. We always, before we get to a final vote, ask ourselves, is this ready to be voted out? And one of the things we're going to have to be comfortable with is sufficient convergence. But I've been in standard setting long enough to know that if you relax on your ambition, you certainly will relax on your timetable. So we've heard the core of the message loud and clear. Trust me on that, and we appreciate it. And we appreciate everyone's participation and all the staff and the task forces and the TA's efforts that have gone into making this a very successful session of the board. Needless to say, July is going to be a busy month for many of us, and there may be no holiday season this year in terms of summer holidays for those in the Northern Hemisphere as it relates to getting the sustainability standard out, but we're fully committed to it. I wanted to thank all the observers on YouTube, public observers who came in the room. It's nice that we're having public observers back again as we've gotten out of COVID, and I'd like to close the public meeting now with just final thanks to all who organized it. I should also thank Megan, who's been here and keeping us all in line this week too. So great job, Megan, on your first travel organization for us too. So thank you. Okay, we'll close the meeting right now.